Yeah, we'll start. Uh, the topic, learning to see a photograph or how to read a photograph. I mean, it's both reading as well as seeing. So both of these are little bit complicated for those people who are very beginners into getting into, seeing or reading the photograph. We typically approach a photograph as, what do you think as a technically accurate representation of what photographer has viewed it. In all fairness, okay, some photographs, for example, snapshots, the pictures, they are not meant to be, having any meaning. It's like you want to put it your dinner, restaurant meal, or selfies and snapshots. All those things, there is no meaning there. You just want to remember them. It's just a reminder, or you want to put it on, say, a social media or something like that. But when we talk about photographs, we are talking basically on photographers who have offered another layer of experience, a reading experience as rich as any written prose. So it's almost like a novel. So many of these photographs are like a novel. They'll tell you a story. In fact, there is a saying which says that, if there is no story in a photograph, it is not considered as a photograph. It's considered as a snapshot, or just a normal social media pic. So every photograph has a visual language. If you understand that visual language, you will get a better meaning of that particular photograph. So a photograph always tries to tell you something. They invite a viewer's involvement, and they demand an engagement with the photograph. But unfortunately, in our present life, what has happened is we are bombarded with photographs. So we don't get time to see photographs and appreciate it. It's like dumping 200 books during this lockdown period and asking you to go through it. You'll probably pick one or two and forget about the rest 180 odd, 190 odd books. So what I'm planning to, just tell today is my method of how do I read a photograph. There is no hard and fast rule, and in fact, there are no books which really talk about how do you read a photograph. Each person has got his own method, and I have learned it over the years, going through how do they read art form. So for me, photography is also art form, and photography is an art form which is much more real than many of the other art forms, because a painter can paint a surrealistic view without any medium, whereas for a photographer, he needs to have a medium. Basically, with that, he can capture that particular photograph. So it's you know a photograph uses a real medium, but it interprets in a way where a photographer tells you something to his audience. So when we look at the photograph, we should look through the photograph, not just look at the photograph. So it's sort of a visual portal where you enter in and then explore it. So by reading a photograph, we decide, what is the photographer's interpretation of the photograph, or maybe it's your interpretation of that photograph. Photographer may not have told that particular matter, but you have interpreted it. Now, there is nothing fixed in this, how to read a photograph. So what I took was one of the American art critic called Terry Barrett. He specializes in reading art photography, and he thinks, there are 4 ways you can deconstruct a photograph. So one is a subject matter, another is a form, the third is a medium, and the fourth is the context. So when you divide the photograph into a subject matter, into a form, into its medium, and into its context, then what you get is a content of that particular photograph. So let me explain in very short this thing, what each one of these are. So take subject matter, the first part. Okay. So subject matter is basically what is in the photograph. So when you try to begin reading a photograph, you start looking at the things, what is there in this photograph, what people are there, what places is there, what things are included in the photograph, and also what things are excluded in the photograph. And that the most important part is the edge of the photograph. Sometimes edge of the photograph tells you something about the photograph which is not included, but it expects you to understand that particular context of that particular photograph. Also, where suppose there is a person there, where is he facing? If it is an animal there, where it is facing? How far it is from the center? Is it trying to move away from the frame or inside the frame? So all these things are part of the photograph. We'll go through the photographs. I'm just giving you a brief introduction so that you get these points right. So logically, if you try to go through it, you can find out the activity of what is happening inside the photograph. How do people use that photograph? What he's trying to tell you in the photograph, the relationship between one subject and another subject inside the photograph. Do they touch each other? Do they look at each other? Do they? Is there an order in how they are placed, or order how the subject is placed in the context of the whole surrounding? So all this comes under the subject matter. Next comes, how is the photograph composed? Now, this is the second part. It's called a form. So how is the photograph composed? So say in a nature photography, the photograph composed around the subject of say animal or any other thing. But there is one more part which is part and parcel of photograph. That is a frame. So what type of frame is there? What type of cropping is done? So that decision and what is to be included inside the photograph and what is to be excluded within that frame. So all that technique basically leads a viewer around the object and gives you a lot of information about the subject and its context. So that is basically the form. So the compositional techniques, say rule of thirds and so on, that sort of composition techniques also speak volumes about that photograph and what photographer is trying to communicate. We'll take few of the examples. And so look at how the photographer has chosen to emphasize within the frame. What technique he has used to emphasize the subject as well as the frame. How does the photograph lead you around in the frame? Landscape photography, most of the time you have seen the leading the eye, but that leading the eye also includes what is included, what are the leading lines, what is the depth of field, how is the focus, where the focus is placed, is the subject in focus or subject out of focus. So all those things come into play. Now, did the photographer choose a particular focal length lens? Why did he use a fisheye lens to give that particular photograph? Or why did he use a very long focal length lens? All those things really make things important as far as the form is concerned. So the next one is the medium. Now this is the technical part. So the technical part, like what equipment he is used. Is he using a film? Is he using a digital? Is he doing it black and white? Is he doing it in color? If he is doing in color, is he giving you a natural color? Is he giving you some sort of faded color? Or is he giving you a HDR? What is the edge frame, what he's doing? Where is it printed? Is it printed on a particular paper? Is it printed on a particular type of canvas? What's the size of the print? What's the paper used? All this comes under the medium. So historically, photography started with black and white. But modern photographers, all of us, most of the time we use both color, or if we want to go back, we use black and white. But when we use a color or when we use a black and white, it has a meaning. It is not just because, I just want to use black and white, I'm using it. It's a photographer telling the viewer that this is the black and white and this is why I'm using. Or if it is a film, if it is a film stock, there are different types of film stocks, different colors of film stocks. There is a tonality which is different, the smoothness which is different. High contrast film stock is there, high contrast work is there. So post-processing, what he has done, has he enhanced it, has he altered it? All those things really comes under the part what's called a medium. Did he use a specific lens for that particular effect? That also comes under this third point called medium. Now the last point is called a context. So context is where really how the photograph is made and that sort of thing comes in. So context is a broad consideration of interrelated conditions. In fact, when this photograph was clicked, makes a lot of difference. For example, if you see this photograph, what do you think? It is a war scene. This is Robert Capa during the Doomsday at the Omaha Beach landing. So all the Japanese planes have put bomb, and so many of casualties has happened. And there is a soldier who is trying to swim and come out of the mayhem. So that particular photograph can't say anything else other than the whole problem of war. But then check this photograph. This is a nice crystal vase. There is a crab there. There is shellfish there. It's a still life photograph. The painters have really done a still life. So photography also, you have done a very nice still life. Now this is, if this was in 1800s, what would have been the case? If this photograph was taken in 1800, it is not, because we know that color was not there during 1800s. So at that time, so if somebody had done a seafood, a fruit, or a crystal, it was very expensive. So basically that showed that this is basically showing the wealth. Now, if it is the same photograph during a food crisis or during a lockdown, what will be your interpretation? So that interpretation changes with the timing. So when this particular photograph was taken. So consideration of the context is deep and it's convoluted. In fact, that is where a lot of different meanings are given to the photograph during different times of either conflict or political events. Journalists trying to give a different perspective of a photograph taken from as a internal observer. The fake news photographs all come under that. Now take example of this particular photograph. If you don't read the title of the photograph, that is sleeping child, and let's say that I tell the context that this is during the lockdown period, then what you would think about this particular photograph? You would think that he's probably his dying child. He's probably infected with corona. His parents are really worried. They're in the hospital waiting for some treatment to happen and that sort of thing. So the context changes depending on when this particular photograph was taken. In this case, it is just parents who are waiting and the child fell asleep and then the photograph was taken. And then there are a lot of interpretations which are not meant to be what photographers' interpretations are. So photographer frequently photographs better than what they know. In the sense, sometimes he may not be giving that much of meaning to that particular photograph, but we as the interpreters, we are trying to give a lot of meaning to these photographs. So that might be one of the reasons. For example, Edward Weston was very angry when they saw this photograph of, this is basically a capsicum, pepper. So pepper number 30, 1930. This was the title of the pepper. What people reinterpreted this was, it was supposed to be a sexual act. He was very angry because he didn't give any sexual meaning to this particular photograph. His interpretation was an artistic representation of a pepper which looks like human form. But then lot of critics were considering this as two persons having a sex. So Western maintained that object which is photographed is photographed for its own sake. It's not reinterpreted by the photographer. In fact, many photographers had their own way why they wanted to be photographed, and they have written about that. Edward Weston was one of the person who maintained that the object is photographed for its own sake. So because that object is there, I'm photographing it. Whereas the Meinoweit, he argued that you can photograph an object for its own sake, but you could also photograph it, or a viewer can interpret it for what else the object might be. Alfred Stieglitz, who believed that you photograph an object with an intention, and also you have to provoke an emotional reaction to the photograph. Now, regardless, what photographers really say, it's for us as a viewer to undertake and find out what these four elements would do, and finally that gives you a content. So content is what a story the photograph is telling. So this is combination of your subject, form, medium, and context. So when you add all of that, then you get a photograph, the meaning of the photograph. So by examining the photograph, we can express the inward visual representation of that photograph within that frame. So we can often intuitively sometimes get it, or you may have to read a little bit about the context, because many a times you don't know when the photograph was taken or what the title of the photograph was given by the photographer. That makes a difference. That's why most of you who enter into contests always give a helpful, meaningful title. That will give you a lot of weightage, because the title will tell you about the photograph much better than just the photograph itself. So this is basically my way of interpreting a photograph. So can I take some questions?
Yeah, doctor, I think there's a question there, a couple of questions.
Yeah, 1 minute. Let me come out of this sharing, and so that I can see the questions. See the chat. I'm not seeing the chat. Okay, there are many questions, but most of them are typing questions. Okay.
The questions
How
are
much
with
time
the
is normally required to go? How much time? Okay, I'll ask questions myself and then I'll answer. How much time normally required to go through a photo? Is it instant or it requires a multiple reading? I answered already. It's not really instant. Many times you may have to go do a very close-up study of a photograph. If it interests you, definitely go through it. Okay. Then, if context is essential to understanding a photograph, this is by Yogesh. Is the photographer's emotion or state of mind a part of the context? I keep hearing that what you shoot and how you shoot is a function of your emotional state. I do agree with that. My answer is emotional state is yes. Sometime when you are really excited, you can get a fantastic photograph. When you're depressed, you get a totally different type of photograph. When you're calm, you get a totally different type of photograph. But unfortunately, most of the photographers don't talk about their emotional part. So that is for you to guess about the photograph. So if you find it, soothing, then it's probably the photographer was in a calm state of mind. Does every photograph has to tell a story? I'm confused. I've heard both sides of the argument. Yes, a good photograph has to tell a story. A photograph which doesn't have a story is a bad photograph. That's how it is. So please come with more questions. I think we'll go to few of the examples. I'll start off with one of the best storytellers, so that you can get a very good context of how a story can be told in a photograph. Now, my intention of reading a photograph is also since all of you are photographers, I want you to tell a story like this in every one of your photographs. It's not just reading other story. When you try to create a photograph, you also try to put a story into the photograph. Now, this is 1932. He called it as High-Rise. That's a place in France where he saw a staircase next to a cycle track. It's a road. Henri Cartier-Bresson was, he's a man who captured lot of decisive moments, moments which really are unique, and they give you a lot of insight into how it really is shot. Now, what he was doing is, he was waiting in the staircase, and since he knew that there is a road there, he knew somebody will come. So he waited for quite a long time, nearly about 40-45 minutes, till that cyclist came. And he captured the cyclist exactly in that particular frame to give the meaning. Now, how do you represent this particular meaning in this particular photograph? You see a cyclist and he is going, and then you see it's blurred. He's not sharp. He could have used a very fast shutter speed, and he could have frozen that particular moment. But he used a slower shutter speed to get that movement, so that he knows the cyclist is moving. So that movement is captured. It's not frozen. But all other elements are frozen. And he uses a different angle of view. He's seeing the road from a top view. So he's in a higher location and he's watching this particular street. So now let's start drawing on the drawing, on the picture, sorry. So see the lines which are moving. So there are so many lines which are, coming across. So the staircase also is the same, and it's all making us go all the way up to the person who is driving he's cycling. So cycling. So our view exactly goes from wherever it is. See, the road also is moving towards that staircase. This railing also moving towards him. The staircase steps also go towards the cyclist. So it is basically telling us, okay, the cyclist is the main person. And then, sorry, this is the next one. So that way, it will give you an overall impression what the person wanted to tell you. He wanted all of us who is looking at the photograph not to get distracted and just see the cyclist. And the compositional elements all point out to the cyclist. So this is not sort of a matter of what do you call luck. This is in street photography, this is called fishing. So you basically fish for the subject. So you know the place, you know the location, you know the composition. You just go there and wait for the fish to come. So this is called a fishing technique in street photography. And this is how you really find out exactly what you want. Let's go to the second photograph. This is a surrealistic photograph. There is layers and layers of composition inside this. This was taken in Madrid, Spain, by same Henri Cartier-Bresson. There is a gentleman who is walking, who is the main subject. But there is also a layer of students or kids, or you can think of children. All are very curious. All are looking at the photographer, and they have a smile in their face. Whereas if you see the gentleman who is walking is pretty grumpy. He's suited, booted, hatted person. And then between all that, you see a wall with a lot of small holes, openings. You don't know what it is. You can't really figure out what it is. So this is a sort of a surrealistic view, but he has captured it in such a way that that person is in exact that particular position, and these kids are all in their own world. So these are different worlds. That's a person in charge. That's the main subject. But then these are also our secondary subjects. And then finally, if you see all those folds, they are also tertiary subjects. So there is again a layers of subjects. You can interpret it in any way. You can interpret, that guy is a sort of a person who's looking after all these kids. They are all orphans. They are all supposed to be sitting in this building which has got a lot of small cubicle holes. That's a story for you to create. But then there is a story in the picture. That's the whole idea. Take this example. This is one of those classic example of Henry Cartier-Bresson's fishing technique again. He knew that there was a steps. He also knew that there was a shadow here. There are a lot of doors which are facing. There are steps again going up to the next level of doors. So he just waited for somebody to come there. So that girl was running up the stairs. It might be a setup, or it might be, she's actually running. So she's the main subject. But then all other characters act as a supporting actors. So see the door structures. So there is big door here, there is smaller doors there, and the staircase which again goes to another door, and then another door. So this girl who's running is running into many doors. So it can be opening for a new horizon. It can be opening into a new house. And we don't know which door she is going to go. So that is the curious part of the story, which he stopped short. He's not telling you the whole story. He's just telling you one of the instances of the story. But with the single photograph, he explains everything. So that's the beauty of Henry Cartier-Bresson. Take these two gentlemen who are sleeping. They are sleeping in a garden. There is what is called a figure to the ground. Figure to the ground is a word which is used in street photography, where your subject really stands out from the background. So both of them really stand out from the background. And they are positioned in such a way that there is a person who is very close to. He's not dead. He's probably just sleeping because he's fast asleep. If he was dead, you can't see the same amount of calmness on the other guy. So he's not dead. Okay. Now, see the position how they are sleeping. This is called a golden rectangle. Golden triangle, you might have heard in a composition. This is a golden rectangle where the positioning is perfect. So this is also a composition technique. And then if you see their body language, they're all relaxed. They're not really looking at each other. They may not be related, but within the frame, they are related. So you're getting a story of two people who maybe or maybe not, they might have just come into that garden, just waiting for somebody else. So it tells that particular story in a very nice manner, along with a great composition technique. This is another surrealistic technique which uses quite a lot of components. There is a railway track, there is a bridge on top, and there are two people who are sort of darkened out. So it looks like it's a single person with the two heads or two bodies. So it is darkened. You can't see a separation between the first person and the second person. And also on the other side, there are a lot of things which are hidden. So there is also a mystery in the photograph. It doesn't tell you, what's exactly happening there. This is a story from Belgium. And along with that, you see these two people who are looking from the bridge. There is also a leading line. And then there is a secondary leading line at the bottom. And then there is a curve here, which sort of isolates them from rest of this hidden stuff. So we don't know what that hidden stuff is. We don't know what these guys are looking. So that curiosity itself creates a story. So that is one other technique where you sort of, it is a detective story, detective novel style way of presenting a photograph, where you don't tell much, but still give enough information for a viewer to think about it. Now let's leave Henry Cartier-Bresson and go to some other people. These are rabbis, Jewish men, and this is something we don't know what it is. It may be a sort of a congregation, but we can see amount of tension. And compositionally, if you see, it's a waveform. It's a wave of people, as well as their whole way how they are standing is like a wave, like this curved wave. So and everybody's face is tense, and they're looking at some point which doesn't exist inside the photograph. Where they are looking, see, everyone's gaze is somewhere here, which is outside the photograph. So that's where the whole wave goes in. So the arrow of this wave is pointing to somewhere which is outside the photograph. You don't know whom they are referring to, whom they are speaking to, but all of them are basically looking at that particular area. So that's another interesting part of this particular photo. So that way it creates a curiosity in this particular photograph. This is a shipwrecking photo. You can see a broken ship on the side. You can see the reflection, and you can see a lot of dirt, mud, and other things in the foreground. So our eyes, this is leading the eye and telling the story. So if we had just given this ship just like this and just reflection, that most of us, when we try to photograph a ship and a reflection, we just concentrate only on the ship, only on the reflection. But this photographer has made it sure that you first look at it here and then look at the ship. Along with that, your eyes also go into the broken ship on the other side. So he's telling the story of shipbreaking without really giving any description. So that's how he's talking about the whole story of shipbreaking in one single picture. Now, this you can say if you don't know the context, if you don't know that it is 2010, you can say this is a lockdown picture. So a guy is sitting there in the center. There are two buildings. Probably it's high up. He's sitting high up, and he's pretty calm. He's got a basket of food or fruits or something next to him, and he's looking outward gaze. And you see the blurred background. So he's just looking at it. Now, most of the time, everybody says, don't put the subject in the center. So, but there is an advantage of putting a subject in the center. It's a fine balance between boring and exciting. So in this case, what he has done is used multiple points and centered him exactly in the center. But there is something curious about it. Why do you make out that he's not jumping out of this particular ledge? It's pretty easy. There is one more ledge on the other side. So because of that ledge of that building, you think that he's just sitting there and gazing outside. If this ledge was not there, this building was not there, it will look like as though he's trying to jump from that particular point, because you can't see his expression, you can't see his face, so you can't see the emotion. So he may be contemplating a suicide if this particular building was not there. Since that building is there, so it looks as though he's calmly gazing from his probably a ledge. Sorry, this was okay. Now, this is in 1979. Remember, this is much before Photoshop. And that is not a lady, it is a mannequin. It is not a fashion model. So what he did was, Guy Borden, he wanted to shoot for this lingerie brand called Charles Jourdan. So it was a spring 79. So what he did was, this is a wall, this is not a stage, and this is ground. So he plucked out of the legs of the mannequin and then draped a dress, put a dress, and then hung it next to the wall. So this is basically two legs which are just sticking from the wall, and then he took a photograph. But overall, how it looks is totally different. This probably somebody will say that it's Photoshop if we do it now, because you can't have a model who is going into the ground. But okay, this if you don't know the context of the picture, don't know the story behind the picture, then you will think that it's rule of thirds, and you will be just looking at that as a rule of third and just keeping quiet. But if you know the context, like I mentioned to you about the context of the picture, and then the whole story changes. So the story here he wanted to tell is the fashion and the model, and how things are going. It may be a good, it may be bad. It's up to you to interpret. This is one very famous picture. Everybody knows about it. Migrant mother. Dorothy Lange took this particular picture. But what we don't know is the context of the picture. Okay, this is during the recession, the Great Recession. This mother had come down, and she didn't get a house, so she's waiting in the migrant camp with kids, and you get that particular look on her face. And the kids are, there are three kids in the picture. There's one kid who's hiding his head. The two kids hiding his head. There's one more breastfeeding kid who's just lying sleeping, and we can see the anxiety in her face. Now, Dorothy Lange tried 3 days to get this particular look. That's why making a story is also a pretty difficult task. So what really happens is, now I'll show you the pictures behind this particular picture. That way you can make out, the stories are not created instantly. They are, the photographers go behind the picture and try to create a story they want to tell. So this was the first shot she was taken. Dorothy Lange went there, they were sitting, and they were all, giving a smile to the camera, because that's a natural instinct for anybody. But with that smile, she's not going to get that migrant look. She's not going to get the story of the depression. She's not going to tell that particular story. This is like anybody camping there, happy children, and that sort of look with me. She went back again and asked them to pose, but they were not professional models. So they posed in this way. This kid was looking at it in a different direction. This kid was looking in a different direction. She is looking at a different direction. The photograph didn't work. Went again, took another photograph of a breastfeeding child with some sort of sorrow in her face. Still it didn't work. Then it went back, asked the kids to again pose, didn't work. So finally what she chose was this particular angle, and that became a famous picture. So this is how you create a story. From the photographer's point of view, this is how you create a story. So when you create a story, okay, it may be fake. You may think, okay, she faked it. No, but the real fact was she was a migrant. She was, she had shifted, she had no house. She was in trouble. But when you see a camera, obviously you give a smile. Despite all your problems and misery, you still give a smile. But that smile doesn't tell the story. So this was another shot, which again was rejected. Now, Museum of Modern Arts has all these photographs kept along with the Dorothy Lange's migrant woman photograph. So that way you can learn, what she really did to get that particular photograph. Many times it becomes instantaneous to get a photograph. This is what's called a Burning Manifesto. Anybody who has seen a Mad Max movie can recall, the way how the Mad Max scenario which is going on. So this is, he was trying to compose this whole mad crowd who's leaving Burning Man festival and coming back. So there are a lot of crowd sitting on the truck, and there is a one masked man who's coming. And what really he captured was this large hoop within that particular band. So that particular picture, this picture won a Pulitzer Prize for sheer amount of composition as well as the storytelling. So that's why it is this particular thing. So these few moments sometimes comes as a luck, sometimes you create it. This is Sebastiano Salgado, one of my most revered photographer. He talks about the African tribe. This is a Dinka group of Southern Sudan tribe. He wanted to show them with all these scars. Now, this is a portrait photograph. Now, most of the time when we do a portrait, what we really do is just take a headshot. If he had taken a headshot of this person, we would have missed all the scars on his face. These scars are sort of becoming a man in their tribe. So you have to scar themselves, and that scar, if it becomes thicker, then they get much more respect in the community, and they wear this whitish makeup. So a black person with the white makeup in a white background, and he wanted to show only the person. So the person is standing out, and remember, the person is not looking at the camera, he's looking slightly away from the camera. The background is blurred so that you don't get distracted at all. You just look at the person, and the scars are highlighted. So that gives a story about the person much more than just taking a normal headshot. Different angle of view. This was in New York. Can you make out how many dogs are there? There is the Felix and the Rover are the dogs, and the Gladys is the owner. So what the photographer did was he went to the Rover's eye level. Rover is the small dog, its eye level, and at its eye level, he took the photograph. So you can see only the front two legs of the Felix, and the two legs of the owner, and four legs of the tiny dog. This gives you a totally different story, because most of the time we don't go to this level down, try to take a photograph. And even when we do that, we just take the photograph of the dog itself. Now here there is a dog's owner and another dog friend who's now not four-legged. If the frame was slightly bigger, this is what I was telling, what is left of the edge of the frame. So here the two legs are inside and the other two legs are outside. So he's trying to Elliot Erwitt is trying to talk about two legs of a dog which is higher, and two legs of the owner, and then there are four legs of the tiny dog. So that's a story which totally talks, and then the background is blurred, so you're not distracted from the background. Since most of you take photograph of a dance, so this is a photograph of a ballet. Now, unfortunately, you don't see the ballet dancers here. They're all blurred because it's a slow shutter speed photograph. But what you see is a George Balanchine, who's a choreographer of that New York City ballet. So he's sitting there, he's staring up at all these dancers who are trying to do a rehearsal and finding out. So by including the movement, by blurring out the subjects, he's getting both the dance, the movement, as well as the choreographer all in one frame. So it's a story of a ballet dancers as well as the choreographer, both of them together. So that's a whole story in a single photograph. Now this is another two slides, and the talk will be over. So this is how this particular diving of a pyre was shot. This is, remember, photograph is a still photograph, but within that you can tell a story, and here you can tell a story of several boys who are jumping at the different stage of jump. Somebody who is already into the water, you can only see two legs. Somebody is just halfway through, another is just taking off from the pyre. There is also one more guy who is just trying to enter and looking at all these boys and trying to get. So the whole, if you do a cinematic picture, this is probably about a 20-second picture, but all frozen into one frame. So this was shot somewhere in 1900. And remember, he had to wait for all these boys and this particular moment to capture. Now, the same story can be told in a totally different way, like this. This is synchronized divers, but they are all synchronized and jumping from different places in a different way. Using a silhouette technique, he is trying to overlap most of them and give you a story. This may not be probably a single shot. It may be a multiple shots which are sort of joined together, or it may be a single shot. He's asked many people to dive from different locations and at a different stage of diving. But what you can make out is each one is separated, each one is in a different state, and it tells the whole story of synchronized diving in one single frame. So this is probably how you interpret different photographs in a different way. This is just an introduction. Let me go back. Let me see the 1 minute. Let me see the questions.
Now we have enough time. We're just about 50 minutes. So
okay.
There is one question which is there in the chat.
Okay. I'll go through the questions 1 minute.
And I also sent you a WhatsApp image of a recent photo taken by T. Narayan. If you can read it, it would be helpful.
Where is the photo?
In WhatsApp. I sent it in WhatsApp. Yeah.
Okay.
You want me to send it?
Yeah, you can share it in this thing so that others can see the. Yeah. Meanwhile, I'll talk about this particular photo. Okay. Could you please give an example of how a beautiful beach sunset or a macro picture of an insect's eye would tell a story? Okay. Now, if you just give a beach sunset with just the sun and the beach, it really doesn't tell a story, because every day sunsets. But if you get a good cloud, if you get few people who are doing something in the beach, probably I don't have such a photograph right now with me to share with you, but I think I can share it later in our forum, and I can give you how it really gives a story. A macro picture, again, insect's eye, insect's action. See, most of the time we have either one insect eating another insect, or one insect which is interacting with another insect. So all this really gives you a totally different meaning to the whole picture. So yeah, that's a picture. Okay. Yeah, leave it there. I'll answer about that.
Yeah.
Where did my chat go? Okay. So that's how it tells a story. Even macro, it's not just example of an insect. We can take an insect photograph in any different angle, but when an insect is doing something, then trying to show the picture, that gives you much better story than just showing the insect just like that. Now that you mentioned setup, is that ethical? After all, photographer's vision. Yeah, it is ethical in the sense, setup in the sense, okay, if you manipulate the picture, then manipulate in the sense, okay, we have all seen the Kumbh Mela pictures. Okay, those Kumbh Mela pictures, most of the time, they are all set up. You have those sannyasis who are, blowing bang and smoke and all those things. Or if you go into camel festivals, most of those pictures all are set up. There is a very thin line of setting up a picture and ethics. Personally, I consider that setting up in that way and trying to take a picture is not really a good idea. You have to be at that particular moment, at that particular time, and to take a particular picture. But most of the time, you won't be at the particular moment, at the particular place, and to tell that particular story. So you opt for that, the second method of bribing that person, making him do something, and shooting that drama as a dramatic picture. I hope I have answered you.
There's one more question,
Yogesh?
Doc. There's one more question about the shipbreaking.
Okay.
Shipbreaking.
Yeah, golden rectangle, golden spiral in case of virus. I'm asking too many questions. Pardon me. Golden rectangle and golden spiral in case of high risk. Do photographers really go out with this mind, or are these innate in their process of creation? See, what happens is when you start looking at composition again and again, you try to compose it in exactly the same way as it comes. So it becomes second nature to go for leading lines, spirals, golden triangle, golden rectangle. All these things come naturally. There are umpteen number of rules, and you can place them to that whatever composition and idea you are getting at that particular moment. So it is not done post-processing. And remember, Henry Cartier-Bresson never used to crop his photograph. He never used to do post-processing in the photograph. The only photograph he cropped was his very first photograph, which became famous. The person who is jumping next to that railway track, jumping on a puddle of water. For that, he was waiting because there was a puddle of water, and person who wanted to go to the railway station had to jump. So he was waiting in a small cubicle, which had a very narrow opening. So there was an area of very dark in his film, so that he cropped it off. But other than that, he was a very much against cropping chap. Okay, now shipbreaking picture, 1/3 of it was not used as a main. It was a large ship. Why it was? That is basically photographer's decision. He wanted to tell the story in that particular way. So he wanted, the ship not intimidating the person. He just wanted to tell it in another way, in the sense, even though the ships are so big, they crumble, they fall. So that's why it's not exactly 1/3. It's telling that even the big things like the ships are vulnerable. That vulnerability was basically shown in that particular picture. Okay. How can a story be told in a nature photograph, or a landscape photograph, or a macro photograph? Story is there. Definitely story is there. Only thing is, it's not a story exactly like a story of what I mentioned earlier, but story is there. Probably we'll go through again, some other time, or we can have a discussion in the forum where we'll try to break one of the nature photograph and try to show you exactly how a nature photograph tells a story. The best example I can give you offhand is Ansel Adams' Teton and the Snake River. It's a very famous photograph. You have a curved S-shaped river which is flowing, and the hill on the background, and there is a cloud. And you see, when he talks about this particular river, it was taken during a daytime where the sun is covered by a cloud. So there is an area around the mountain which is covered by cloud. The river is shining again because of the sun which is falling on the river. There is a darker area of the river. So this river is sort of a dark and white, and the mountain again is dark and white. Sky, if you see, one half of the sky is dark and one half of it is white. So he's telling multiple meaningful stories. Story in the sense, don't think of, like a novel. Story doesn't mean that, there should be a hero, heroine, villain, and that sort of story. It's a story in the sense it should tell something meaningful. That's what when you say the story. Same thing applies to macro. I just explained. When you give a macro photograph, you include some other element. It's a conflict between one insect with another insect, or a mating between one a male and a female, or interaction between a leaf and the insect, and that sort of thing. So personally, what do you do in terms of scouting in order to tell a story? In terms of research, planning, location, main thing you keep mind always, okay, photographs don't just happen out of the blue. Luck plays hardly a role. Repeated actions really tell a story. You see, landscape photographers, they don't go one fine day to one fine location and then get all those elements together. They go to the same location again and again and again and again until they find the right location to tell the right story. Macro photographers do the same thing. Not that, you like, I have done just the lockdown period. Since 22nd, every day I used to go between 4:30 to 7 o'clock. I used to take photographs of all the insects. I used to get the same insect again and again and again. But over the days when I go, the same insect I get with a different context. It was fighting with another insect, it was trying to eat another insect, or it was sitting in another place. So the amount of photographs what I could get was totally different from if I had just gone for one. So that's how it really happens. Okay. Don't mean post-processing. Do we then assign these ratios and composition roles? Yes, definitely you can crop and get into what ratio you want, what composition you want. You can create a rule of thirds out of the picture which never had rule of thirds. That is possible. And personally, what do you do in terms of scouting in order to tell a story? Okay, I think yeah, I repeated that. Now we'll come back to this particular photograph. Here, you can relate this to lockdown. Everybody is having a mask here. This is may not be because of lockdown, because in many of the villages, they don't want to show their faces. So that's why they cover their faces. So see here, there are 6, 7 people, but none of them overlap each other. So the cameraman has clearly found his angle in such a way that he's not overlapping any one of them. He has made sure that, this lady in the front who is in focus is the main person. Others are blurred, but still you can make out that they are having a veil in front of their face. You can't make out what is going on. Probably a chula here at the right bottom. And all are sitting, all are probably staring. So it may be a house, it may be something which is happening. So there is a story, but probably it's not clear enough for you to understand. Many a times you may have to research, find out what exactly the story was about. Then you may get a context. Sometimes photographers write about it, but in my personal opinion, if you write a paragraph about a photograph and then explain the photograph, it's not really a good photograph. A photograph should itself tell 1,000 words about it.
Doctor, this gentleman, T. Narayan, who took this shot, reports
Yes.
was basically reporting hunger, like lack of food for these people.
Lack of food. Okay.
But I don't see it. I mean, I didn't see it. That's why
no. This is nothing about. Probably if he had highlighted this dry chula, this looks like a chula. Probably if he had highlighted this one much more than those people who are looking happily at the camera, that would have made a difference. I think there is one more question. Let's see. Any reason why most street photographers are using monochrome even after 1970? Okay, color distracts in street photography. Most of the time, you in black and white, you can tell a street photography story much better than sorry, in black and white, they can tell a story much better than in color. So street photography, most of the time it's luck. Many a times you do wait for juxtaposition. You wait for that particular things to happen. You wait for that particular moment to really happen, and then you create a story. But there may be somebody who is photobombing that particular picture because you have no control over the street. So that's why a lot of people go for black and white. There are good color street photographers. I'm not telling that it is exclusively black and white, but many people prefer black and white as a medium, which reduces the distraction. Because in street photography, most of the time they use not a shallow depth of field, deep depth of field. So there is a distraction behind it. So, right. Any other questions? I think I covered most of the questions which were asked. Hopefully this was informative. Can we, if there are no questions, then I think we can stop this thing. It's almost an hour. Any other questions? Shrikant?
I think there is no questions because people now will have to study their own photographs. Doctor, just one more photograph I've added because I think we have about 5 minutes more.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. This is probably a street photograph through the glass. And if you have any questions, just please do type it out in the chat. I'll cover it. This is some foreign location. Probably there are a lot of Mickey Mouses, Minnie Mouses, and all the maybe Disneyland. Can't make out for exactly, but this is through the glass.
Yeah.
So you can see the reflection also of these toys. The story somewhere is missing here. It's nice. This is more like more of a tourist photographs. Now, what I would have added is some human figure here is probably looking through the glass. At that particular moment, it would have given you a much better overall picture of the context of the picture. Here, there are subjects are there. There is a good reflection. They are all inside the showcase. But what is missing is somebody standing outside the glass looking at those pictures.
Yeah, thanks, Doc.
Yeah, let me see questions. There are 3.
Yeah.
No, these are all thank yous. Okay.
Yeah. I think thanks, Doctor. I think.
Yeah, thank you.
Because it's more than
and if you have questions, you can always put it later on our forum. I'll give an answer. I can also